so low as to use the very method that has perpetuated evil throughout our civilization. I'm sick and tired of violence. I'm tired of the war in Vietnam. I'm tired of war and conflict in the world. I'm tired of shooting. I'm tired of hate. I'm tired of selfishness. I'm tired of evil. I'm not going to use violence, no matter who says it.
It's easy for us to blame this on Hoover. It's like if you and I sit and made a monster in the basement, and all at once we see this monster going out, destroying the neighborhood, and we want to say, oh, that monster, no, us. I mean, whether we like it or not, Hoover and the FBI, the CIA, they're an extension of us.
This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy.
What the media don't want to tell you about is that Martin Luther King, in the last years of his life, was a leading critic of U.S. foreign and economic policy. And in fact, at the time, in 1967 and 68, the mainstream news media railed against Martin Luther King. Publications said he was speaking like he's a mouthpiece for Hanoi. He was viciously red-baited in the news media.
It is my hope that power for poor people will really mean having the ability and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous of saying no. We will get together and be together, black people, Mexican Americans, American Indians, Puerto Ricans, Appalachian whites, all working together to solve the problem of poverty.
I think there's several reasons why the movement happened when it did. One reason is that it was the culmination of a whole series of struggles, legal, political, cultural, and social and economic.
A movement which is to change the face of America begins when Rosa Parks, a black domestic worker, tired from a long day, refuses to relinquish her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. At the urging of E.D. Nixon, a young minister reluctantly agrees to lead a movement against a bus company and Jim Crow laws. The minister's name is Martin Luther King. King and his movement will go on to challenge all of segregation in the South. Initially, King will use a boycott to shut down the segregated bus line and a downtown business district vulnerable to black purchasing power.
Martin fits in several ways. He was the culmination of a protest movement that was just erupting in the Deep South. But Martin didn't create the movement. The movement created Martin. And by that I mean that Martin's brilliance was that he was a beautiful spokesperson for the frustrations, the latent anger, and the aspirations for successive generations of African American people who had been denied the full access to the American dream. King spoke in a sonorous, religious voice which was tied very closely to the culture of people who were struggling to be free.
This morning, the long-awaited mandate from the United States Supreme Court concerning bus segregation came to Montgomery. This mandate expresses in terms that are crystal clear that segregation in public transportation is both legally and sociologically invalid. In the light of this mandate and the unanimous vote rendered by the Montgomery Improvement Association about a month ago, the year-old protest against city buses is officially called off, and the Negro citizens of Montgomery are urged to return to the buses tomorrow morning
on a non-segregated basis.
King's victory, inspired by Rosa Parks' bravery, leads to the formation of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Led by young ministers, the group adopts the theories of Mahatma Gandhi, theories of nonviolent civil disobedience.
When SCLC began in 1957, Montgomery had already been operative for 375 or 60 days, over a year. So it gave people a sign and a symbol so there could be convergence. There could be people coming together from around the country to focus in on that effort. But I think in saying that, I don't want to romanticize it, because I think very clearly in this American climate, teaching and practicing nonviolence and advocating nonviolence is very, very hard work.
Well, in the very early years, King sort of erupts on the national scene with the Montgomery School boycott, and he's challenging the system of racial segregation in the South, and he's doing so in a more militant way than the NAACP, although the Bureau had, since the 1940s, been monitoring the NAACP. What's very interesting is before King becomes a major national figure in the 1960s, he finds himself on the Bureau's reserve index, so that they saw him as an individual who should be closely watched.
After the McCarthy scare, J. Edgar Hoover had the country under control. There was no question here. He had all the progressive forces, the white progressive forces, running for cover, hiding everywhere, so he had nothing to worry about them. And out of nowhere, the people for whom he has the most racist contempt, they jump up and begin to put all this to rest.
For 10 years, the FBI mounts a well-financed campaign to destroy Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. Using its contacts and influence with the press, the federal agency involves the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, the Atlanta Constitution, U.S. News and World Report, and Life magazine as part of an anti-King campaign.
What's involved here is a quite different program than simply monitoring stories and responding to critical stories, and it's an attempt to shape public opinion. And so that if there are individuals or organizations that you believe threaten the national security interests, or you have doubts about, one thing to do is to create a negative press. And so that's what the Bureau did, and very purposefully in the case of King.
Dr. King begins publicly to criticize the FBI, owing to the agency's unwillingness to transfer racist agents and its dereliction in protecting civil rights workers. Hoover, as well entrenched as any federal bureaucrat will ever become, considers the agency his personal fiefdom. Enraged by King's attacks, Hoover will call King the most notorious liar in America. Formerly based in the agency's Albany, Georgia office, FBI agent Arthur Murtaugh, testifying before a congressional committee, confirms Dr. King's criticisms. Referring to FBI bureaus, Murtaugh says, quote, "Their racial attitudes were the racial attitudes of the South in the pre-civil rights, pre-Brown decision times."
Our feeling was that the FBI agent from the South was indistinguishable from his community.
The FBI had to work with the local law enforcements. That was their task. So it was clear here, first of all, they have comradeship from being in the same type of job, law enforcement agencies, and they were comrades from being in the South there together, not having too much work, joking together. Since the local police were the enemies, were our enemies, were supposed to be our allies, it meant an automatic split between them, which never occurred.
Now, the other thing that we must see about this struggle is that by and large it has been a nonviolent struggle. Let nobody make you feel that those who are engaged or who are engaging in the demonstrations in communities all across the South are resorting to violence. These are few in number. But we've come to see the power of nonviolence. We've come to see that this method is not a weak method, for it's the strong man who can stand up amid opposition, who can stand up amid violence being inflicted upon him and not retaliate with violence.
In the early 1960s, Birmingham, Alabama was said to be one of the most racist cities in the U.S. Its mayor was Arthur Haynes, an attorney who would later defend James Earl Ray. Birmingham police official Bull Connor will initiate a reign of terror against the city's black citizens in a campaign of police-sponsored violence which will shock the nation and the world.
This is not a sectional issue. Difficulties over segregation and discrimination exist in every city, in every state of the Union, producing in many cities a rising tide of discontent that threatens the public safety. Nor is this a partisan issue. In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics. This is not even a legal or legislative issue alone. It is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets, and new laws are needed at every level. But law alone cannot make men see right. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the Scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution.
Leaders in the movement: A. Philip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters; Roy Wilkins, executive secretary of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People; Walter Reuther of the AFL-CIO; and the Reverend Martin Luther King head the march down Constitution Avenue to the Lincoln Memorial. A parallel group proceeds down Independence Avenue to the south. This is no parade. There are plenty of placards, but few banners and no precision marching. There are no trumpets or drums, but there is almost overwhelming music. The sound of 200,000 voices joined in the battle hymn of the civil rights movement. We shall overcome.